Welcome to Face to Face, and today we're going to speak about Yemen. We're going to talk about the children in Yemen and the enormous difficulties they are facing during these wars, who have been on forever. And I'm with Nicolas Davies, and with a journalist and author of a book. So, Nicolas, welcome to Face to Face.
Hi, David.
So let's go over the article we just published, and then you co-wrote with Medea Benjamin, and the title is "Will Biden End American Global War on Children?" So maybe we can see a little bit what is the situation in Yemen, more specifically, and then after that we will talk about the children.
Yes, well, Yemen is generally considered the worst humanitarian crisis in the world at the moment, with other war zones that the US is involved in close behind, like Afghanistan. But Yemen is really just a crime against humanity, a genocide. It fits all those definitions. I mean, the US has been involved in it since 2015. The US is a member of the coalition that is, just really indiscriminately bombing all sorts of civilian infrastructure, and there have been horrific incidents involving, bombings of school buses, marketplaces, weddings, hospitals, schools, and there's been a cholera epidemic in the middle of it. And really, it's absolutely essential that the US stop sending weapons to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and completely disengage from its role in this war, and then assist the United Nations and impartial actors to actually provide food, medicine, relief, reconstruction, everything that is needed there. But I mean, when it comes to the children of Yemen, this is really just a horrendous ongoing war crime.
Yeah, I showed the photos of the articles we published from you, where you see the school in middle of, I don't know what we can call this. It's absolutely devastated building, and the children in middle of it. I think trying to have their first. So the situation for the situation for the children has been worsened than ever before.
Well, because in the midst of all this, we have the pandemic, and we have Trump having cut off aid to Yemen, and cut off the US role in the WHO, which provides a lot of aid to Yemen. I mean, one of the scandals in the whole situation is that, in fact, whereas the US and Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, the leading powers involved in this war, were also sending, humanitarian supplies into Yemen, they have all virtually cut that off. And so, I mean, there are children literally starving to death whenever we see pictures coming out from hospitals there. I mean, first of all, half the hospitals are destroyed or damaged. But when we see scenes from hospitals there, we see what we've seen in every famine across the world for decades, just little children with, you know, little skinny bones and distended stomachs, and you know, with children just dying all the time, constantly. And but the main obstacle to doing something about this is, of course, the war itself, and the blockade by which even, you know, ships bringing food and medicine, you know, are being stopped by warships, and you know, this is really, you know, and the role of the US and other Western countries in supplying weapons, the weapons that are being used. These are, you know, in the wake of these bombings, they find the remains of the bombs and the guidance systems, and, you know, they have you know, Raytheon or Lockheed Martin serial numbers on them. These are American weapons that are being used to kill children.
But in the Middle Age, the war were not done like this. They were like special places with a camp where the soldier were fighting other soldiers. It was not, the civilians were not part of the game. They were not. What happened between Middle Age and now? I mean, we are in middle of a humanitarian crisis at the level where it is never at that scale. I mean, what line did we cross to get in that situation?
Well, I mean, even in the Middle Ages, cities were besieged, cities built walls, and then, you know, armies came with huge cannons and you know, so I mean, but the weapons we have today, I mean, this is the absurdity, really.
Yeah.
The American way of war.
Yeah.
You know, when we hear about Rwanda and people being killed with machetes, you know, we think that somehow it's more civilized to drop bombs on people from a safe distance. But, you know, the wounds inflicted by US bombs and missiles are, you know, as horrific or more horrific than, you know, what happens to people with swords and spears and machetes.
Yeah, and the landmine.
And in fact, I mean, as we said in the article, the Stop the War on Children campaign has published fantastic reports that make all this so clear and detailed, that in fact, in these US-led wars, twice as many of the injuries to children are in fact blast injuries. And blast injuries from explosives are especially damaging to the small bodies of children. 10 times as many 10 times as many children, or children are 10 times as likely as adults to suffer traumatic brain injuries from these explosions.
Absolutely.
And also 80% of children injured by blasts, bombs, and missiles suffer penetrating head injuries from shrapnel, whereas adults, it's only about 30%. So, I mean, in so many ways, children are not, you know, are just so much more at risk and vulnerable from these kind of weapons. And, you know, and of course, the thing is that, you know, in the 1940s, after World War II, the whole world joined the Fourth Geneva Convention to protect civilians in times of war and military occupation. And, you know, it's not, you know, people, you know, if people listening in America don't understand, you know, this is illegal. You know, it's illegal to drop bombs on children. It's not, you know, and during, you know, I wrote a book about the war in Iraq, and during the war in Iraq, the UN Human Rights Office in Baghdad issued human rights reports every 3 months. And, you know, and they constantly were in disputes with the US authorities over the legality of the way the US was waging the war and conducting the occupation. Because, you know, and as one of those reports said, you know, we remind the multinational force, as it was called, that, you know, it is not permissible under international humanitarian law to conduct military operations in civilian areas, and that the presence of a small number of combatants in a civilian area does not change the civilian character of that area. And, you know, the US, while claiming to support and uphold what they like to call a rules-based world, or a rules-based international order, the US, you know, pays no attention to these rules. They employ lawyers to basically reinterpret them and find, you know, come up with some clever legalism for why they're allowed to behave in these ways that, you know, that are illegal under the Fourth Geneva Convention. You know, but of course, you know, the US is just never held accountable. It has a veto in the UN Security Council, and nobody is holding it to account.
But 500 million children affected by war right now, it's an enormous number. I mean, it's really, and so what can we expect from the new Biden administration? Does something could change? Does he has the power to do it? Does he has the bone and to do it? How do you see the
Well, I think the world should be very skeptical. Biden's record throughout his career, actually, I mean, early on in his career, he did oppose, you know, some US wars, the Vietnam War, the first Gulf War. But, you know, at a certain point, since the Clinton administration, really, Biden, as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, he held very completely one-sided hearings to get the Senate in support of attacking Iraq in 2003. You know, he made sure that no anti-war voices were heard in his committee. No one who actually, you know, opposed the war, or even, you know, was concerned about the predictable consequences of attacking Iraq. So that's Biden's record. In the Obama administration, you know, he supported, you know, counterterrorism warfare. In other words, you know,
the drone.
Well, the drones, but also just, you know, in Afghanistan, for instance, he opposed Obama sending more troops, and he supported, you know, Obama withdrawing some of those troops and then relying more on airstrikes and just special operations forces conducting kill or capture raids in the night. And, you know, really this standoff warfare, you know, which then completely destroyed cities like Mosul and Raqqa in Iraq and Syria at the expense of tens of thousands of lives, maybe hundreds of thousands. You know, there's been no official public accounting of how many civilians died in Mosul. The Kurdish intelligence reports said that they counted at one point 40,000 civilians killed in Mosul, mostly by US bombing. But there's been so little accountability. I mean, you know, since the epidemiological reports were done in Iraq back in 2004 and 2006, you know, the media and the politicians in the West just, you know, just tried to discredit those reports, and yet
well, they are very silent about it.
But, you know, by any objective standard, the most thorough studies that were done, and they found that hundreds of thousands of people were killed in Iraq during those first few years of war. But and these wars have gone on and on and on since then, and you can't drop bombs and not kill people, and this U.S. way of war, to minimize U.S. casualties and get these wars off our TV screens and the front pages of the New York Times. They've successfully decreased the U.S. casualties at the expense of using these standoff weapons that are much more damaging to civilians and to people in these cities that have been bombed to rubble by American-made bombs that our tax dollars pay for.
Yeah. And what do you say about the sanctions? Because the U.S. has always used sanction as a weapon to actually to get the country in worst shape possible.
Yes, UN special rapporteurs have compared these unilateral sanctions on places like Venezuela and Iran to medieval sieges, except, as they have said, instead of just bringing a city to its knees through surrounding the city and besieging it and starving the inhabitants, they're really doing this with entire countries now, cutting off food, cutting off supplies of medicine. And this is another form of warfare, really, and is also, again, coming back to the legal questions, is also illegal. A UN special rapporteur who went to Venezuela called for the International Criminal Court to investigate the US sanctions against Venezuela as a crime against humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because you affect the political level, you affect the economical level, you affect the social situation with people. And of course, if people have less access to resources, they're going to have more. They're going to be more upset and angry and be able to transform the situation. So it creates this instability and does.
Yes, and when it comes to children, I mean, essentially what they're doing is collective punishment of children to try and change the political behavior of their parents. That's essentially what this amounts to. So, they're basically threatening children with starvation and preventable diseases, because their parents have voted for the wrong candidate, the wrong candidate in the eyes of the United States. And this is all just horrific. So when it comes to Biden, I don't think we can say yet exactly what his policies are going to be, but I mean, the burden is on him when he's just become president of a country that has been waging these horrific wars and horrific economic warfare against all these countries for 20 years. He does not deserve the benefit of the doubt as far as any of these policies. He has to now prove to the world that the United States is better than that. That the people of the United States, are ready to stop these wars and to stop killing children. The Stop the War on Children campaign, which is run by Save the Children in Britain. They said the UN has documented a 250,000 human rights violations against children in all these wars in 15 years, including more than 100,000 incidents in which children have been killed. It just has to stop. And and that is the burden on Biden, to stop it and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yeah. So now to close a little bit this interview, how do you see the international community playing in that moment against the US, for the US, and does the dynamics going to change concerning Yemen and Iraq and all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the shame in all this, obviously the shame is primarily on the United States, but I mean, there are two forces in the world that can really have some impact on US policy. And one is a reaction from the American people politically, to actually take to the street and demonstrate and find effective ways politically to make our government stop what it's doing. And the other is, these US allies. Now, when it comes to Iran, of course, there's been a split between the US and its European allies, European Union, France, Britain. And so how is that going to play out now? Because what we need very clearly is for the US to re-enter the JCPOA without preconditions, without some prolonged negotiation process, whatever other complaints the US may have about Iran, or whatever complaints Iran may have about the US, they can be taken up, once everyone is back in the JCPOA. But Iran has said as soon as the US rejoins the JCPOA, they will sign on too, and they will come back into compliance also. But it's the US that scuppered the deal by dropping out of it. And the US under Trump was at odds with its European allies over this. And the European allies tried to find ways around the US sanctions.
And the new country, like the new power, like China, India, and can play a role in that moment, or do they're not going to play anything now?
Well, China certainly and Russia, have acted very responsibly, really, in avoiding a military confrontation with the United States, which of course could be World War III. So, China is very powerful. China could, do more in terms of international humanitarian aid. But I think that the onus in terms of having influence over the US rests more on the US's Western allies, the Western Europeans
and European Union,
Japan, because the US really gets away with these horrendous war crimes.
And on immigration, you get away on immigration, you get away on many, many issues, because what happened on immigration at the border was absolutely legal, and Europeans didn't say a word. So it's because they did the same thing in Greece and Turkey. So it's but that's another discussion. Anything you want to plug before we finish, Nicolas? Thank you so much for your time and your patience.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I urge you to read my book.
Yeah.
Blood on Our Hands: Invasion and Destruction of Iraq. It has a nice foreword by Benjamin Ferencz.
Yeah.
He just turned 100 last year, and he is the last surviving prosecutor from the Nuremberg war crimes trials.
Wow.
And his lifelong work has been to actually, for, as he says, law, not war. He has worked on the development of international law and believes that all war criminals should be held accountable, including American ones.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much. So that was your show Face to Face, and please keep watching your news on Pressenza.com, and we hope to see you and hear from you very soon. Thank you very much.